Title: My mom ignored me when I told her my cousin did something really wrong, but she went ballistic when he pranked my brother. It's strange, the things you remember about childhood. Some memories are vivid, as if they happened yesterday, and others feel like a distant dream. But this one memory, this one I'll never forget. It's a story that haunts me, and one that changed the way I saw my mother, my family, and myself. I was 8 years old when my cousin, who was a few years older than me, visited for a family gathering at our house. I remember him showing me his new flip phone, something that seemed so cool and high-tech back then. I was young, curious, and trusting, especially with family. I assumed he wanted to show me some game or something fun, so I followed him, never expecting anything else. After that day, I felt weird and confused. I didn't understand exactly what had happened, but I knew it felt wrong. I needed someone to help me understand, so I went to my mom. I thought if I just told her, she'd know what to do. She'd talk to my cousin or his parents and make sure it never happened again. After all, that's what moms are supposed to do, right? When I finally told her, her reaction caught me off guard. She didn't respond with concern, nor did she ask any questions to try and understand what happened. Instead, she dismissed it almost instantly. "Oh, don't be silly," she said, barely looking up from whatever she was doing. I remember standing there, stunned, waiting for some acknowledgement that never came. It was as if I hadn't said anything at all. Her indifference stung. I didn't understand why she wouldn't take me seriously, but as a kid, I didn't know how to keep insisting, how to explain myself better. So I just buried it, and the weird, uncomfortable memory turned into a shadow I tried to forget. But then, a few weeks later, something happened that threw her reaction into sharp contrast. We were at another family gathering, this time at my grandparents' house. The adults were talking and laughing in the kitchen, and the younger kids were all in the living room, sprawled out in various states of post-dinner sleepiness. My little brother, who was 5 at the time, had fallen asleep on the couch. He was out cold, face down on the cushions, absolutely adorable as younger siblings can sometimes be. My cousin decided to play a prank. He picked up a marker and started drawing little stars and squiggles on my brother's cheek. It was harmless and silly, the kind of thing older cousins often do to get a laugh. I remember watching from the other side of the room, feeling a mixture of amusement and relief that for once, I wasn't the target of his teasing. But then my mom walked into the room and saw my brother's face. Instantly, she erupted. Her face turned red. Her voice thundered through the room, and she stormed over to my cousin. "How dare you touch him like that?" she yelled, her eyes blazing. "Who gave you permission to mess with him? Do you think this is funny?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to watch the scene unfold. I watched, wide-eyed, as she continued to berate him, threatening to ban him from our house and saying she'd tell his parents if he ever tried a prank like that again. She was furious in a way I had never seen before, her anger fierce and protective. It was as if nothing mattered more in that moment than defending my brother from this silly prank. It felt like she was ready to go to war for him. And there I was, standing in the doorway, trying to process it all. I remember feeling a strange sense of disbelief, a sting of betrayal. My mom had barely reacted when I tried to tell her about something serious, something that left me feeling uneasy and hurt. But here she was, going full-on mama bear over a prank, one that wasn't dangerous, just a silly joke. That's when I started to notice the pattern, one that had likely been there all along but had gone unnoticed in my childhood innocence. My brother was her golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one she protected fiercely, the one who always seemed to get her full attention and love. I was just the other kid, the one who got brushed off, who had to deal with things on my own, who couldn't seem to get the same fierce, protective energy she reserved for him. I didn't have the words back then to understand or describe what I was feeling. But in the weeks and years that followed, the differences between us grew clearer and more painful. I noticed the way she laughed with him, the way she listened to his every word, the way she defended him without a second thought. When I had problems or concerns, they seemed to be brushed aside. I became the child who learned not to speak up, who buried things deep down and kept them to myself. I didn't see the point in trying anymore. Looking back now, it's even more painful. It wasn't just that she failed to protect me. It was that she chose to protect him so passionately over something so small, something that didn't matter, while my own needs went unheard. That day changed me. It taught me to fend for myself, to keep my pain hidden, and to accept that I was always going to be second in line when it came to her love. And the worst part? I didn't even realize until much later how deeply it had scarred me. Today, I try to let go of the bitterness, to make peace with the past. But sometimes, in quiet moments, the memory surfaces and the old feelings rush back. I wonder what kind of person I would be if I'd had a mother who believed me, who cared enough to listen, and who fought for me the way she fought for my brother over that ridiculous prank. And I wonder if she'll ever understand just how much I needed her that day, and how much I needed her all those years. Update. Confronted my mom about her reactions to my cousin's behavior. Not the final update. Hi, everyone. First, I want to say thank you to everyone who commented and shared their own stories and support after I posted my experience. Reading the responses really helped me see things more clearly and gave me the courage to confront my mom about what happened all those years ago. I didn't plan on doing it so soon, but all the feedback made me realize that I needed to speak up. This might not be the final update because things didn't exactly go as planned, and I still feel like there's more to say and do. So, a few days ago, I decided to go to my mom's place and bring it up. I wanted to address both incidents. The time my cousin did something that left me feeling uncomfortable and vulnerable, and then how she reacted when that same cousin played a harmless prank on my brother. I'd thought about it a lot, and I decided to approach it calmly, without placing blame or trying to make her feel guilty. I just wanted her to understand what it felt like for me as a kid, how invisible and overlooked I'd felt in those moments. When I got there, we chatted for a bit, just small talk at first. But eventually, I worked up the nerve to bring up my cousin. I started by reminding her of the time he pulled that prank on my brother, drawing on his face with a marker. She actually laughed, remembering the incident as if it were just a silly family memory. It was strange seeing her smile about it now, considering how angry she'd been back then. But I guess enough time had passed for her to look back on it with a different perspective. Then, I tried to steer the conversation toward my own experience. I mentioned how I'd come to her after the other incident with my cousin, telling her what had happened and how she'd brushed it off. I explained, as gently as I could, how hurt and abandoned I'd felt in that moment and how it had impacted me over the years. I wanted her to know that I wasn't bringing it up to blame her, but rather to help her understand the weight of her response and how it had shaped my trust in her. As soon as I mentioned it, though, her expression changed. Her face hardened, and she crossed her arms, almost as if she were on the defensive. She said, "Well, you were just a kid. Kids imagine things all the time." Hearing that felt like a punch in the gut. It was like she still didn't take me seriously, even after all these years. I tried explaining that it wasn't something I'd imagined, that it had actually happened, and that I had felt unsafe and unsure, looking to her for comfort that she just hadn't given. She cut me off, saying, "That was so long ago. Why are you bringing it up now?" Her tone was sharp, irritated. I felt the familiar sting of being dismissed all over again, as if that child version of me was still standing in front of her, waiting to be heard. I told her that, for me, it wasn't something I could just get over, that I had spent years wondering why she hadn't believed me, why she'd chosen to protect my brother over me. At this point, she sighed, telling me that I was being too sensitive and overreacting. She said she couldn't remember every single detail of what happened back then, and that I should just let it go. It was infuriating and heartbreaking, but part of me wasn't surprised. I'd hoped, of course, that she'd listen and understand, maybe even apologize, but it became clear she wasn't ready to acknowledge how her actions had affected me. I could feel myself getting emotional, and I didn't want to keep pushing, so I decided to leave. I thanked her for listening, even though I didn't feel like she truly had, and walked out, feeling both drained and oddly lighter. While I hadn't gotten the validation I was hoping for, I felt a small sense of relief knowing I'd finally said what I'd been holding on to for so long. Now, I'm left wondering what to do next. Part of me wants to try again, to explain to her more fully how her dismissiveness affected me, hoping that maybe if I approach it from a different angle, she'll finally understand. Another part of me is considering moving on and seeking closure on my own, focusing on rebuilding my self-worth and not waiting for her to validate my experience. I'm not sure what the next steps are, but I'll keep you all updated if I decide to approach her again or if anything changes. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, processing what happened and trying to find peace with it. Thank you all again for your support. It's meant more to me than I can say. Final update: finding closure after confronting my mom about my cousin's behavior and her dismissive response. Hi everyone. I wanted to share a final update to this story. Thank you so much for the support, advice, and encouragement you gave me after my last post. This process has been hard, but all of your messages gave me the strength to keep pushing forward, even when I didn't get the answers I wanted from my mom. Here's what's happened since I last wrote. After our difficult conversation, I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not to try talking to my mom again. Part of me was still hoping that she'd come around, that maybe she just needed time to process everything I'd said. But as the days passed, I realized that she wasn't going to bring it up on her own. She went back to normal, as if nothing had happened. And that was painful for me to see. It made me feel like she truly didn't understand, or didn't want to. In the end, I decided to write her a letter. I figured this would give me the chance to explain everything without the risk of being interrupted or dismissed. I wrote down everything I'd been holding on to: the hurt, the disappointment, the need I'd had as a child for her to protect me, and how her response had left me feeling unsupported for so many years. I also explained that, while I wasn't looking to reopen old wounds, I needed her to understand how her choices had affected me so that I could find some kind of closure. I kept the letter with me for a few days, debating whether to send it. I knew that once I gave it to her, the ball would be in her court, and I'd have to accept whatever response, or lack of response, came my way. Ultimately, I decided to send it. I dropped it off at her house one afternoon, leaving it in her mailbox with a note asking her to read it when she had the time. Then I waited. Days passed, and I didn't hear anything. I started to wonder if maybe she'd ignored it altogether, and I was preparing myself for the possibility that I'd never get a response. Then, about a week later, she called me. Her voice sounded different. Not defensive, not dismissive, but softer, almost uncertain. She told me she'd read the letter. She said she hadn't realized until now how deeply her response had affected me, and that reading my words had forced her to confront a part of herself she wasn't proud of. She admitted that she'd always had a hard time dealing with difficult emotions, and that, growing up, she hadn't known how to handle complex situations, especially ones that made her uncomfortable or scared. She told me that it was easier for her to brush things off rather than confront them head-on, and that she regretted making me feel like my pain didn't matter. Hearing her say these things didn't erase the years of hurt, but it was something, a recognition, an acknowledgement that I hadn't gotten before. I could tell that this was hard for her to say, and while she didn't apologize in so many words, this was as close as I think she could get. She told me that she hoped I could forgive her someday, but she understood if I couldn't. In that moment, I felt a complicated mix of relief, sadness, and acceptance. Relief because she had finally heard me. Sadness because I wished it hadn't taken so long. And acceptance because I realized that while she might never be the mother I'd needed, she was at least trying to understand. Since then, I've made peace with the fact that I may never get a full heart-to-heart apology. But for me, knowing that she recognizes her mistakes and understands, in some way, the hurt she caused is enough. I've decided to focus on my own healing, and part of that means not waiting for anyone else's permission to move forward. I'm seeing a therapist now, and for the first time, I'm learning how to rebuild the self-worth and confidence that was shaken by my experiences as a kid. Our relationship is still a work in progress. We're careful around certain topics, and there's a mutual understanding that things can't go back to the way they were. But I feel more at peace now, knowing that I can set my own boundaries and that I don't have to keep seeking validation from her. So, that's it. That's where I'm leaving things. This isn't the ending I imagined when I first started this journey, but in a way, it's what I needed. Thank you all for being here for me. Your support helped me find the courage to speak up for myself, and that's something I'll always be grateful for.